So as we look at the different translations here from the English to the Greek to Salkenberg's Ginsburg Hebrew to the Hebrew Matthew and the Dalman Delitzsch, which we've been following, the Hebrew Matthew and the Dalman Delitzsch, use the same word. They use this, as you can see, Vamach Ol. And so it really took me some time to find it, but thankfully, several years ago, I found this somewhere, I don't even remember where, and I bought it. And I thought, I don't even know if I'd ever use it, but it sure came in handy this time, so I'm thrilled that I did, even though I never really understood what it would mean or why I would need it. That book covers 1,000-year period and traces the changes within the Hebrew, the biblical Hebrew, okay, as is affected by the Aramaic and perhaps even other languages, and hence the difference. But those words mean the same thing. They mean stroke, rub, or erase. And so as we're thinking about this in the aspect of our sins, or that we're indebted to God, it's a pretty cool thing to think that God can erase our sins. And so if we think about this as God keeping some type of a ledger. So I put this together, not that it's great, and I don't really know how it would even look, but this is just a concept. All right, so we have me, who is the indebted one to God, all right? And at Sinai, God gave all these things. You know, we call them the 10 Commandments, but there's a whole lot more. Idolatry, using his name in vain, keeping the Sabbath, honoring parents, killing, anger, hatred, adultery, coveting, lusting, lying, attitude. We don't even think about that. Motivation. Am I operating out of love? So if we put that in the column that we're all responsible in this contract between us and God, and then of course put some dates on there, like from 1955 to 1960 or whatever. I didn't do any of those things because I was too young. And then from maybe 1957 forward, I'm guilty of almost all of them. For breaking it somehow, I may not even be aware. And, you know, we might say payments due. Was I making a sacrifice? You know, if I were part of Israel at that time, that would probably be filled. Not really knowing how to do this, I'm just putting this down some way. What is owed? 100%. I owe God 100% of everything. I owe him 100% of me. So total owed is really me, eternity. Me. I owe him everything that I am. So if he's keeping track of what I owe him in this ledger, okay, it's a great concept to think that he can erase everything I owe. And when would that happen? Well, of course, when I come to understand that Jesus has paid my debt in full. It says paid in full by Jesus. And if we use the idea of erasing or scratching out, you can see these little lines, so that if somebody said to God, well, she did this to me, God would look in his book and go, I see nothing. I see nothing. I see her debt is paid in full. Stamped right over there. Now, of course, this is my imagination. That doesn't mean that this is the way it truly is, but it most certainly tells us that God is able to wipe out our debts. Now, Moses used this word during his time of intercession for Israel. During Israel's time of leaving Egypt and coming to Sinai, when Moses went up into the mountain to receive the law, okay, as he's gone, Israel starts to revert back to their old ways in Egypt. They want a god. Moses must be dead. They have Aaron build a golden calf, and God sends Moses down. When he gets down and he sees these people worshiping this idol, right, the very thing that they agreed not to do, he's angry, and he throws down the covenant, or the stones which the covenant is written on, and they are broken because the people of Israel had broken their promise. They had broken their end of the covenant, their end of the deal. And then he turns around and he goes and intercedes on Israel's behalf for forgiveness. And he actually says to God in Exodus 32, and 33, that if you will not forgive them, then blot my name out of the book you are writing. Now, that's a pretty bold move, okay? But it also shows the deep love that Moses had for Israel. And it's God who says to them, no. I will blot out the name of those who sin against me. So who of us doesn't love the concept of having our sins blotted out? And yet, as Jesus elaborates on these thoughts of forgiveness, he tells a parable in Matthew 18, 25 to 35 about the indebted servant who is forgiven his debts by the king. But he turns around and he has his fellow servants who owe him maybe a few dollars, thrown in prison when they can't pay him. And of course, when the king hears of it, the king rebukes him and tells him he has a lack of compassion, and he throws him in prison until he can pay the debt that he owed God. And in doing that, Jesus is telling his listeners that if we want forgiveness, we need to forgive others. And I think this can be a really difficult thing to do, depending on the level of hurt one experiences when somebody sins against them. Okay? And I know there have been times in my life where, it's human. Jesus can erase it and not remember it, but our memories seem to bring things back up. And so I know oftentimes I have had to remind myself, nope, I've forgiven that person. I'm not going to hold whatever happened against them. They are forgiven, and you pick up from where you left off, and you don't hold it against them. In Jesus' teaching in Matthew 18, 15 through 17, it appears that Jesus advocates what I would call healthy confrontation. Now, none of us like confrontation, but there's a way to be healthy. And notice this, Jesus talking about your brother trespassing against you. He says that you are to go and tell him his fault. And that's exactly what Leviticus 19:17 was referring to, is if your brother sins against you, then go tell him his fault. Perhaps even if you see your brother fall into sin, you are to let them know that they're falling into sin. But that confrontation also needs to be carefully weighed out. In other words, what is my attitude? If I'm going to confront a family member, what is my goal? Number one, is it reconciliation or is it to win an argument? If it's to win an argument, don't bother. It needs to be reconciliation. And I think that brings up another concept here, is what is an offense? Okay, I think that oftentimes when we're annoyed with the way somebody says something, we think, I've been offended. Oh, I can't possibly. I've got to confront this. We don't need to confront every little thing. We need, is the old saying, pick your battles. But most certainly, if somebody steals from you, if somebody is looking at your loved one in a lustful way, if somebody's lying about you or lying to you, those are things that need to be confronted. You go to your brother, you tell him or her their fault between the two of you. If they listen, then you will have gained a brother or a sister. If not, then you're supposed to bring two or more with you, so that out of the mouth of two or more witnesses, every word is established, and then you take it to the church. This is something we do not do. And that word church means the ecclesia, the called out ones, the people that you are in relationship to. It does not mean the law, going to court of law, although Paul did utilize that freedom he had. But what I'm trying to get across is we need to really be checking our attitude before we confront. A humble, loving attitude is important. Now, notice that most everything Jesus is talking about, of course, he's talking about to Israelites, his fellow people. It is within a community that has already set up boundaries, etc. Now, for us who have been grafted in to this root of God, this tree of God, we might wonder, okay, so I have to deal with this with my Christian brothers. What about those outside? I don't have to forgive anyone else who isn't a Christian, do I? And we don't get away with it that easily, because we're given, well, at least two examples. I was going to say three because of Moses, but actually it was within his community that he was threatened. And Jesus had both. He had within his community, and he had the others, the Romans who crucified him. But notice what Jesus said on the cross: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And again in Acts 7:60, as we look at Stephen, our last one here, as he was being stoned within his community, again, he still prayed, Father, forgive them. Do not hold this sin to their charge. And so we're reminded that regardless whether it's in our own community or outside of our community, when we're wronged, we still need to forgive. It may be slightly a different form, that we just willingly announce to God we forgive them. There's not enough time to go into this fully, but I think the foundation is laid for us to really think about our need to forgive one another and the others. And so we will leave off today with just the benediction. May you be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next week.